Good afternoon, everyone. I'm staring up at the ceiling where I think the microphone is. Oh, that's what they told me. This is Jeff Davis with DODD. Once again, we apologize for those of you that were with us on Friday. We apologize for that, but we're glad to be with you this afternoon. We're going to chat a little bit about our budget. We will try and accommodate questions as much as we possibly can. Got a large group around the table, so I will turn this over where appropriate to folks that may know more than me, and we'll cover the basics of the budget if you like, if we can. So let me start with our overall sense of what we're trying to accomplish. We started with the assumption coming in, knowing that Governor DeWine had announced a number of priorities out there, all of them very, very good, many of them around children, right? Diverse and broad-based in the approach to attempt to help children. We fit nicely in that overall goal of serving children. So priorities around early intervention and multi-system youth were front and center in our priorities. Obviously, workforce is another big initiative. We know that intimately. And there were other kinds of gaps in our system that we wanted to see if we could address, including, I will say this out loud, sort of my goal of taking any particular part of our system out of feeling defensive necessarily in one way or another, and I'm speaking, I guess, specifically about ICFs. And so we knew that there was a piece of statute in place and a new rate reimbursement structure that went into effect July 1 of 2018. We wanted to make sure that we maintained that reimbursement formula moving forward if we could into the next 2 years, because there are some things I think that we'll chat about here shortly they wanted to see if the ICFs would partner with us on, particularly children. So I'm going to, after I chat, the other piece of the puzzle, let me say this, is that we wanted really the budget to be as simple as we could possibly make it, and I think that it is. I don't believe that there is anything in the budget with respect to what's there, whether language or dollar amounts, that necessarily folks should have opposition to. There may well be things where folks think it's not enough, or I'm not a beneficiary, or whatever it might be, but we really intended not to have a controversial budget. It really was our goal to see if we could identify particular pain points in our system right now where we knew were there, and see if we could find ways to address them. And the last overarching piece, I think, to the budget that is important, at least in my case, was we wanted to see if we could craft something that used as much existing system resource as possible, and use that, and then bring in new general revenue fund monies, where needed, or ask for them where needed, and so that you've got a budget that does actually do, we think, quite a bit of things within the bigger scope, but yet doesn't have as much new general revenue fund dollars as one might think, given all the initiatives or the cost of all the initiatives. And the desire there was, one, to be sensitive to the priorities that the governor has laid out, the other pieces to the puzzle, and if indeed in the second year of the biennium or whatever it might be, if numbers started to go south, overall tax revenue or whatever it might be, that we could be protected as much, right, from the legislative process or others as possible, because we're not glaring out there. I feel we're very positive in many measures from what we can accomplish, but the dollars don't strike you, new dollars don't strike you to me as they just don't stand out maybe as much as other systems do. So it really was a goal to protect ourselves where possible if we could, with the assumption of, obviously, of some internal risk. So let's chat a little bit about the basics. Again, I don't believe shouldn't be any surprises in the language that comes out. There shouldn't be any surprises on other than what we have already talked about. Certainly in testimony and other places, we're being as transparent as we possibly know how to be. So let me cover the 4, 5, 6 bullets, and then I think what we'll do is I'd love to have Kim Houck talk about our early intervention initiatives a little bit. We can talk all about workforce as you wish, and then we want to accommodate your questions, and I think you've got to type those in. Is that right, Rebecca? Yes. Okay. So as we highlighted in our testimony, we do have an increase in homemaker personal care, the DSP base rate, and the other accompanying components. And I want to be real clear about this, because I know the message can get confusing when it is in the newspaper or the media or whatever it is, what we are saying we are doing is increasing the direct care component of the overall homemaker personal care rate, right, in the respective waivers, right? Approximately 11% over the 2 years, so roughly 5.5% a year, about 63 cents on the direct care component each year. There was an overall goal, I believe, from many stakeholders in our system to get to $13 an hour. We got two-thirds of the way, right? Two-thirds of the way. So I suspect there might be more efforts in the legislature or whatever it might be, but our attempt was to get as far as we could, possibly get, and have a head start, yes? And so the key to that component, and I've said this out loud as often as I possibly can, the key to being successful, if one considers it that in this regard, was the partnership with our local county boards. We are so very grateful. We approached them literally after I began as director. They turned around in consensus and said that they would support us in this effort to increase direct care wages and the direct care component of that. That, to my knowledge, is the first time that that has happened. The county boards obviously have provided match for many, many years, but to dedicate their local levy tax dollars to direct care rate increases, I think, is remarkable and certainly very appreciative. That allowed us to get from 1/3 of the way to 2/3 of the way to 13. They're covering that, in the second year of the biennium and going forward, and of course our match is there. So literally, it was a dollar for dollar match. Keep in mind that we're starting that, or have planned to start that in 1/1 of each year, so it does take time, and I know that the urgency, I understand that the urgency is now, but you got to make sure you have the money, and then we'll get started on those discussions right away. I know that we had, as far as the rate setting models, the rulemaking, the working with CMS and all those kind of things. I think we can hedge our bet to at least begin the conversations now. If it turns out that we're not successful legislatively, well, that would be a different story. But I think we can get on the path to make sure that we can begin 1/1 of 2020 and then 1/1 of 2021 to make sure we get all that way. And then whatever happens, if there are positive things coming out of the budget process in addition to what we have, then we can certainly accommodate that as well. And I know there are pieces of the puzzle that are not there. I want to be clear. I know that the day array, the spectrum there, we can talk all about that. It deserves all of our concentration. I try to be sensitive to every piece of the workforce puzzle in our system. I know we tried to get at, candidly, where I feel the most desperation is. This is my sense, the most desperation, and that is on the ground residentially, and you feel that if you talk to the DSPs too, where they carry around their phones continually with the sure bet that they're going to get called to stay over or work overtime or work the weekend or whatever it might be. That is no disrespect to anybody. That is a real life challenge. I know there will be further conversations about that, and there's going to be much, much broader conversations. The day array folks in all of the spectrums truly are getting hit in a number of different ways. We're going to commit to you to work through all of those pieces to the puzzle. Debbie Hoffine is here. We chatted this morning about this. Kim's here, and we know that we've got to get at it in a variety of different ways. We've got to, work at inclusion. There are just a number of things, and so, in addition to the conversations we're having now, we're going to turn our full attention to the whole department on this whole day array piece here very soon. So we move on just a little bit from the workforce. There was a work group of system stakeholders. I was not part of that, ultimately, nor was the department, to make sure to establish as much of an accountability mechanism as consensus would allow at this point. And we can continue these discussions, but I can't imagine anybody not wanting to make sure that if we're successful in the rate increases, to make sure that they end up in the hands of our direct support professionals. So there is an effort to use our National Core Indicators survey by adapting the questions to be much more specific about the rate increases, establish baseline, check annually thereafter, and be as transparent as possible. The difference this time, of course, is that that where in the past the survey data was in aggregate and was not provider specific, this time it would be provider specific, will be provider specific. And so we're hoping that that kind of transparency and public awareness of did this money indeed get down into the hands of direct care, will be shown, and the market will work in that regard. But I'm sure we'll have more and more conversations about that. It's of interest to everybody that has anything to do with the budget process, where the legislature or the administration or us, or you as system stakeholders, I'm sure will all have an interest in doing that. With that piece to the puzzle, however, is that we want to make sure that folks understand that this, in particular, this DSP rate increase as proposed, again, is the direct care component of the rate. So in essence, it can function as an average of sorts, right? It is not saying that every new employee gets $12.38 an hour, or whatever it might be. And I'm sensitive to those that provide service as you're messaging. This is an 11% increase, in the direct care component of the overall rate structure. So the next piece somewhat around workforce was one that I thought has stuck out for many years, and that is the overnight rate, the on-site on-call. For whatever reason, merited or not, the direct care component of the on-site on-call rate basically has been stuck at $6.09 for a few years, and since 2005, I think it only had one adjustment, something along those lines. So I think that it's somewhat patently unfair to reimburse providers a rate that is less than what they're legally mandated to pay. It's that simple to me. That's sort of black and white. I mean, I know in many cases that providers are paying more for the on-site on-call rate, but to reimburse them less, basically more than $2 less than legally what they're required to pay, I thought needed remedied. And so this budget allows us to do that. We've got a lot around early intervention. We're going to talk about that. We have investment in for non-medical transportation. We did ask for that. Obviously, that was a 2-year discussion, I believe, and there's still discussion going on. And I understand the challenges, with large fleet. I understand it. So, we'll have those discussions, I know, but the money is in there. There are certain pieces to the non-medical transportation proposal that I think are very good, and that is it begins to more adequately reimburse those that have adaptive vehicles, which you think would be essential. It does reimburse, or it proposes to reimburse direct care staff more on the mile, getting closer to the federal transportation rate for when they use their own cars. I can't imagine that there's any disagreement with that idea. We ask a lot of our DSPs, right? And it does try to incent smaller vehicles because the future really will look more and more like, more flexible, inclusive activities. I think that's inevitable, although there are a lot of things that we can talk about around the full data rate as we go forward. So those are the good things, I think, to the non-medical transportation. There are some others, and I understand that they're feeling it's really going to hurt if I've got the large vans in there. May well be some legislative empathy to that. So we'll go through that as we move forward. And then, of course, we do, as I mentioned, maintain the ICF rate. There's, in the statute, and allows it to play its normal course over the next few years. And then I think we'll have Jenny talk a little bit about where we are with the franchise fee in a minute, but I did want to let Kim talk about some of the really good things around early intervention. She can talk about the larger picture the administration has, and then, we'll follow that with Jenny to talk about, where we want to go with multi-system. One of our little pieces of the puzzle to multi-system. There was a lot of rambling.
Good afternoon. So there's really 3 main pieces to our budget request for early intervention. The first one is really looking at the way we fund service coordination and evaluation. So we know that over the last 4 years, we've had an over 10% increase of referrals and around an 8% increase in children served. And we understand here that those referrals cost the agencies a lot of money to do the evaluations and assessments, even for those children who don't go on to be served. So we asked for some additional funds to catch that world up to where it should be today, because we also know that you haven't seen any sort of rate increase in the last 5 or 6 years. The second big piece is the governor's new initiatives around lead exposure and neonatal abstinence syndrome. So through our rule process, both of those diagnoses will become automatic eligibility. Those children with those diagnoses will be automatically eligible for early intervention. So we expect our numbers to increase somewhat over the next couple years as we find those families that need our services. So we've asked for some additional funds to support that work. And then the third big piece of work is really, as the director talked about in his testimony, completing the transition of early intervention from the Ohio Department of Health to our department. So as most of you on the phone know, in 2016, we became the lead agency for early intervention. And one of the pieces of work that we left at the health department was our central intake and child mind activities. So through this budget request, we will be able to pull that work in-house and work collaboratively both with our central intake vendor as well as you at the local level to continue that targeted outreach for children that we serve in early intervention. So those are the three big pieces of work that we're excited about to move forward with you.
All right. Thank you, Kim Houck. So the next piece of the puzzle around the children is that we do know that there are some children who will need a little longer out-of-home placement, in some cases probably permanent out-of-home placement. These kids, in some cases, we're sending out of state. We just don't have the private provider capacity to serve a lot of these kids. The numbers seem to be overwhelming to county boards and those on the ground. And we even have, I think now, maybe approaching double-digit children in our developmental centers, which is really, to me, while they're being served well, it's a scary proposition to think that we can't have the private provider capacity to deal with that. So one of the ways that we're working with our private ICF providers is around a funding mechanism, sort of an increase in our franchise fee, right, to pay for, maybe put some additional rate for providers that are willing to either continue to serve these folks. There are some certainly doing well, and others to bring into the game. So Jenny Wisman kindly has started those conversations. They are moving along. I am very grateful to our ICF partners. So Jenny, you can share whatever you wish around where we are there.
Good afternoon. This is Jenny Wisman. The director pretty well described the process we've been using to help encourage providers to serve some of these more difficult children that we know may not be able to go back home due to some very unfortunate circumstances. So right now we're working with some of the provider associations to look at a option to count inpatient days of ICFs versus counting vacancies, which is a concern of the private providers that they have to pay a franchise fee on vacant beds. So we're looking at another methodology right now, and thankfully a lot of our partners have looked at what other states are doing. So we hope to be able to come up with an agreed upon methodology soon that we can roll out to stakeholders at large. And in conjunction with that, we will also be vetting what we're calling an outlier rule, meaning where we would pay providers to serve children who meet certain criterias, and they would get an enhanced rate to serve those kids in ICF. So we're just in the beginning process of that, but shortly we will be releasing that rule and getting some input from our stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. And the other piece to that puzzle is that we want to make sure that we prepare those willing providers as much as possible to succeed, right? So we'll probably look at some consistent training across the board, look at any number of factors to try and make sure that this is helpful, including probably enhanced wages for direct care staff as part of this rate increase. But the last thing we want to do, is have providers wade into this pool and then find that the temperature's too warm or whatever, analogy you wish, right? We want to make sure that folks succeed. These can be very tough children. They deserve our best effort, and I think together we'll try our best to give it to them. So I don't know if there are pieces to the puzzle that I missed. Jeremiah, why don't you talk about the next steps in the legislative process, if you want to, and then we can take any questions that folks want.
Yeah, so we thought it might be helpful to kind of walk through the budget process. It's not your normal animal, and a lot of folks might not have full understanding or experience with it. So I think as everyone's seen kind of in the media and through testimony and stuff, the governor has kind of introduced his priorities for the budget, and most of the directors have provided at least one round of testimony to this point, kind of on their priorities. So now we are kind of awaiting actual language for the budget, the actual budget bill. That should happen sometime today. So sometime today, available online should be the entirety of the budget. So you'll be able to read through that, look at the various line items and language components. Like the director said, I think you'll find that our language is pretty minimal and pretty straightforward this time around. You'll see in a lot of the kind of budget lines, some of it can be kind of confusing with how we move stuff around and structure stuff out. So feel free to reach out if you have questions on those sorts of things, because they can be confusing when you start to get in the numbers. So we'll have language later today, and then kind of the process right now is the budget is before the House side of things. And so starting next week, subcommittee will meet. So the House breaks up into various subcommittees on topics, and we're in the Health and Human Services subcommittee. So the director will testify Monday on our portion of the budget again in front of that subcommittee. And the subcommittee will have a couple weeks to kind of hear testimony. After the directors go, they'll open it up for public testimony. So you as stakeholders will be able to contact Chairman Romachuk's office, and then Chairman Olschlager's office in front of full finance to be able to testify on the budget. So we welcome that kind of support and can help you along if you have any questions about who to contact or when those things are going to be happening. We don't have dates on public testimony yet, but it should be here within the next couple weeks. And so that's the House side. So that the House will, so again, these are the governor's priorities right now, and now it's nothing's set in stone, nothing's a done deal. It's kind of now up to the legislator and what their priorities are, and so they'll change the document as needed. They'll pass it, and then it'll go over to the Senate, and then we'll do this all over again. And it'll also be pretty condensed as well. The governor needs to sign the budget by July 1st, so a pretty tight timeline here. And so we did, I think you'll be able to see, if you're on the webinar, that you'll be able to see there's a page of resources. Again, it can be kind of hard to find stuff. We have, if you didn't get to see the director's testimony this past week, there's a link to the Ohio channel that has the governor's the director's remarks that I think start just after 52 minutes. Additionally, all the House Finance Committees are streamed live and archived on the Ohio channel. So if you can't get down to Columbus for testimony, but kind of still want to stay in the loop, you'll be able to watch it there. And anytime the director testifies, we'll be sure to share that afterwards. And then additionally, there's some links for the Ohio House Finance Committee and the subcommittee that'll show you when meetings are. They'll post agendas, they'll post all the testimonies. So again, you can kind of follow along there. And then next down is a link to OBM, the Office of Budget and Management. That right now has kind of one-pagers and white papers and some overviews of the budget that you're welcome to read after. And then if you don't get the Director's Corner, that's a sometimes weekly email from the director that'll have some highlights, and we'll share kind of some of these resources in there and kind of keep you up to date throughout the process. And that is all I have.
Thank you very much. Did anyone else around the table want to say if we missed anything? Okay, question?
So the question we got is, when exactly will the pay increase for DSPs? When will that happen, and how much will it be?
Okay, so let's assume that we are successful. Let's assume that there's a couple of things, right? If there's more added, the timeline should be roughly the same. So we have, for the direct care component of the HPC rate, if we're successful in the budget, the budget will take effect, as Jeremiah just said, July 1. We're planning for January 1 of 2020 to have roughly that 5.5% increase. The first half of the increase take effect January 1 of 2020. That's roughly 63 cents in the direct care component. And then January 1 of 20, which is when the second year of the biennium, which is when the county board contribution in effect takes place, we would see another 63 cents increase in the direct care component, right? And that would take effect January 1 of 2021. So it is about 11% overall. The first half of that 11% is January 1 of 2020. The second half is January 1 of 2021. That's when you can begin, providers can begin to get reimbursed, bill and reimbursed for that rate increase. Well, any more? Well, it really was designed to be a relatively simple budget, but I can't imagine that. If you have other questions, you're welcome to send them to me, or if you don't want to do that, you can send them to Jeremiah or to Clay or to Kim, or I see, we maybe do have one more. Okay, the question is, go ahead.
That inflates up with the
You
rate.
have to read
That
the
would be.
question first.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to hear that there is support for an increase for DSPs. Is there consideration for the cost of taxes related to the DSP increase? I assume you're meaning the employee-related expenses. If you are, then those components of the rate adjust accordingly too. And we are welcome to share because, I mean, our rates are built off of, in large measure, the direct care components. So they're public. Everybody can see exactly what our rates are, how they're built, which pieces of the puzzle are funded at what have what level attached to them. And I think that's what you mean. And so for providers that have other costs associated to employment of your direct care staff, those adjust accordingly. Okay, with the 10% increase in EI referrals, how much is due to the opioid issue?
So we are not sure. We can tell you that in calendar year 15, there were approximately 4,000 delivering mothers that were diagnosed with dependence to opioids or other substances. Right now, we don't collect in EIDS that information, but we will start in July when our new rules and system is updated.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. So the next question, this is good, is will an increase in the on-site on-call rate affect the support of utilizing remote supports? Many presentations have focused on the cost savings of remote supports over on-site on-call to providers. I think that's an absolutely fabulous question. I too worry about the balance. I am not interested in having providers double down on on-site and on not using remote supports now because on-site on-call there's additional monies there. I think the push, it is fair to say, and I was part of it, that we pushed remote supports heavy based on the lack of reimbursement to providers. Whether that was the right way to do it or not, we did do it. I agree with that. The fact of this matter, I think, is once we now have 400 plus individuals on remote supports, we're finding out that the benefit to the individuals really trumps everything else, and it should be an added benefit to providers who obviously were having to pay staff much more than what was reimbursed. My suspicion is providers will still have to pay staff because of overtime and such more than they're reimbursed. But I am hopeful, and I think we'll watch very carefully to make sure the attempt here was, this really was an attempt to be fair to providers and to hopefully keep that balance. And we'll watch very carefully on that balance. I do not want to do anything that disincents the movement towards remote supports where appropriate. Is the DSP rate going to be across the board for every DSP providing HPC? Does that mean in the 3 waivers? It is homemaker personal care. This is not applicable to the day array. It does not provide an increase to the day array. And is this applicable to ICFs? Obviously, ICFs are funded very, very differently than home and community-based waivers, very differently. And the fact that we are trying to accommodate the ICF workforce challenge on the ground is why we're so diligent about maintaining the current rate reimbursement formula that is in statute. And we anticipate that that will continue to accommodate, right, in its own way. But you don't increase, I mean, the ceilings accommodate, let's put it this way, the reimbursement formula and the ICFs accommodate higher ceilings for direct care staff. How does this affect shelter workshops? There is not, as proposed, an increase for DSPs in shelter workshops. I did talk about that to begin with. I'm sensitive to workforce across the board. We're going to have, I'm guessing that there will be an attempt moving through the legislative process from advocates potentially to maybe to affect this in one way or another positively. But I do know that we have, I would say, front and center system-wide conversations to be had on the full day array. And it's a little more challenging in the day too, it is fair to say, because of the budget limitations that we currently have in place. It's not as simple to enact as direct care and homemaker personal care, but that's not an excuse. It simply takes a rather larger conversation. Is there any opposition to any of the proposals from any known entity organizations? Well, I think there are those that you know, with merit, are unhappy because either they're not affected by the budget or they feel it's not enough. I mean, that's pretty much what I've heard. I don't, as I said to begin with, I don't think that there is anything in the budget that people should oppose. I can be wrong, and we'll find out, but I think it's meant to be as simple as it can be and address what we think are some of the significant pain points in our system. So I think what I've heard so far is, you know, an unhappiness for those that are not touched by increases, or those that feel that getting to 1238 simply is not enough to make the kind of difference that needs to be made. But I can be wrong. But we did not start out with any intent really for controversy. I mean, we're not taking on this part of the system or this part of the system or doing anything that would indicate that we know better than others. Where can we find the breakdown of how the HPC rates are funded? For example, the percentage of the rate that ties to DSP pay. They're public. We can make them public. I mean, we're open to anything. There's nothing secretive about them. This is what we did in 2005. We built rates with the different components. It took us 2 years to do it. We've now adjusted them as we've gotten increased, particularly over the last 2 or 3 budget periods. Really, those were the first. So, I am wide open to sharing them. We can think about how we do that. We can put them on our thing, we can clear them in the corner, we'll chat about it and figure out how to do it. Certainly get them through the associations or anything you want. There's nothing secret about them. The DSP pay increases for 2020 and 21 will not include DSPs working in adult day programming settings. The answer to that is, as proposed, the budget does not include pay increases for DSPs working in adult day programming settings. That is correct. What kind of increases are available for those of us who bill at a daily flat rate, such as adult foster care, now shared living?
What factor? Just HPC.
This, again, the rate increases that are proposed in the budget are homemaker personal care in the 3 waivers. Can you expound a little on NMT rate structure changes you mentioned earlier? Is there an end in sight from the work group, specifically for vehicle size and rate structure? Yeah, so, I mean, part of this, part of it was that, well, this, as I said, was a 2-year process for sure. There was controversy to it in the sense that those that had vehicle fleets that were some, the larger vans not very pleased, some with others. So really, we think that the money as proposed in the budget will accommodate the rate structure that we had laid out. If there are adaptations to that, if there is hold harmless or anything along those lines, then that would require more money than what we have proposed in the budget. And then I suspect, depending on what we see in the budget, we will go through further conversations and certainly the rulemaking process to see this in effect. The difference from my perspective, maybe from the past, and what I suggested is I really don't want to delay implementation of the good parts of this rule, because there are some really good parts in this. So if there needs to be some accommodation for those that feel that the transition is too fast, that would be where I personally would prefer we have that conversation, as opposed to, 1-year delay in everything or a 2-year delay in everything or whatever it might be. The answer is, will the proposed rate increase for DSPs in any way affect their ability to receive the longevity add-on rate? No. They are still eligible for the longevity add-on rate. This does not affect that at all. Comments, thank you. Thank you. I believe you're hitting the important points of need. Well, that's very nice. That had to be a close friend that did that. I'm grateful.
I sent that.
Oh, Debbie sent that. That's very funny. Just a comment, thank you for advocating for early childhood services in the budget. It can help us all continue to provide quality services and increase services to families. We know that that's one of our better models in our service system, is early intervention, certainly at the local level. It's had all of us know that's had tremendous success for those with delays. Some of them up and out of our system, never to be seen again, and of course some that probably improve lives so that it's not as intense at a later age. And so I'm appreciative for the governor's priorities. I am very much so, and I'm appreciative for Kim's lead on this. So as much as you want to pay attention, there's a lot going to go on with the children across multiple systems. We are all in. Are the recommendations from the provider compliance work group included in the bill? That would be a sort of summary suspension language. The answer is yes. It will be in there. I think there is probably an amendment from the work group coming to change it just a touch so that all parties are agreeable, but that language is in the budget as introduced. Okay. I can't tell everybody how much I'm grateful that you would tune in. We've got another one on Friday. We have one more?
Nope, and this.
No. Okay. Well, then I think and there was another nice comment. See, that people are so very nice. You can save the real harsh comments for later and send them just to me if you want to. So we are grateful to everybody. We look forward to working with you in the future. We have so much to do together. And we'll talk with you shortly. See you.